Hello everyone, so welcome back to this channel. In this video, I want to show you how to perform some of the past year question relating to the topic testing. Alright, so before we perform the past year question, here is just a summary of what is in the testing topic. So first I will call the double V, stand for validation and verification. So these are the 6 different methods for validation. Range check, check whether the number is within the range. Length check, usually check whether the data input is within the length requirement. And type check to check whether the data entered is within the type we want. Let's say, is it a number or is it a string? Format check whether it obeys a certain format. Presence check to check whether certain characters is inside the data input given, like at gmail.com for an email. Check digit is usually used for barcode. Whereas verification, there are 2 different methods. Double entry stands for you type in the same data 2 times, like when you type in password in a website, to check that both entries are the same. Visual check basically just involve you seeing the data entered to make sure that it is correct. So these are the different methods for validation and verification, whereas another component of testing is the types of data. So we classify data into 4 different types: normal data, abnormal, or sometimes called erroneous data, extreme data, and also boundary data. So let me give you an example of what it means here. So let's say your program only accepts the value from 0 to 100. All right. A normal data would be a data that is within the accepted range, something like 55, 75, 99. All right. And abnormal data would be a data that is outside of the range. For instance, -5, 120, so on and so forth. Whereas extreme data is normal data that is either the maximum or minimum. And in our case, there our extreme data would be 0 and 100. All right. Whereas the last type of data is called the boundary data, which usually comes in pair. So in our case here, our boundary data will be the data outside of our normal accepted data range. So something like -1 and 0, so they come in pair. So this is one of the boundary data. -1 is the boundary of 0, and the other one is 0 and 1. So this is another set of boundary data. It could also be 100, 101. So this is the boundary data. All right. So also 199. Okay. So these are the 4 different types of test data. So these are basically all about testing. So let's proceed to some of the past questions that have been asked on these topics. So a program has been written to check the value of measurement, and the measurement must be, so this is our criteria, a positive number and given to 3 decimal places, like 3.982. So a normal data example, we need to give it a normal data and also the reason of why we need to provide a normal data. So I will write something like, because it must be a positive value, so we can do 5.123 because it requires 3 decimal places. So the reason we want to give this type of testing data is so that to test whether whether program will accept this data, because it's normal. This data is within range, it's a type of normal data, would accept this data. So that's, you can write that as a reason. Whereas an erroneous number will be something outside of the range. It could be something like -2.152, or you could also write a positive number like 1.23, but not in 3 decimal places. That would also be an erroneous data. To make sure, the reason we provide this data is to make sure that our program, that the program will reject this data. So let's move on to the second question. Explain why 2 pieces of boundary test data are required for this program. Give an example of each piece of boundary test data. So I will write, let's say, because we only accept positive number, so one boundary data would be -0.001, 0.000, So that's the boundary between the smallest number we can accept, right? So the reason of it, I provide this boundary data is because negative 0.001 is the lowest number, it's the biggest number, sorry, the biggest value that will be rejected. Okay. Of course, you can give more than one boundary data. You could also give 0.000 and 0.00 0.001. All right, because 0.001 is 0.00 is the smallest number that will be accepted. So that's about it. Let's move on. Explain why verification is needed and how verification could be performed by this program. So there are two different methods of verification. So we have double entry, can you write, or visual check. So both of these methods, if you think about how you are asked to repeat your password every time you register an account, is because they want to make sure that the data you enter is correct. So the purpose of verification is to ensure that it ensures data entered is correct. And they said give an example of how verification can be used. So you can either write, we can use a double entry method, or we can check it visually after we key in the data we want to. All right. So here is just some partial question on this topic. You can see that it's quite mark worthy. It's around 10 marks here in the entire paper. So let's move on to another question about test data. So after knowing the different definitions of data, you should be able to solve this. A program checks that the data enters between 1 to 100 inclusive. Identify one piece of normal, extreme, and erroneous, and give reason for each. So I would write normal test data, as well as if within 100 to 100, then it's okay. I just write 55. So your answer should be in 1 to 100. And the reason I give this answer is because it is a data that is within range. It's within the range. Whereas an extreme data, if you remember, is the biggest and smallest numbers that the program can accept. So either 1 or you write 100. Because they are the biggest or smallest numbers the program can accept. Using short form here to save you time, can accept. Whereas erroneous data, you could just write any negative number, a -5, or you can even write 105, because they are the data that is outside of the range. Data that is outside of range. All right, so that's about it. We got 6 marks out of 6 from just this. And let's move on. And here they said, see, there are 4 validation methods and 5 descriptions are shown. Draw a line from each validation check to the most appropriate description. So length check, let's see. Length check whether the data enters of the specific length. So definitely not this one. Also not this one. Not this one. Oh, this one checks that the data input has 3 digits. So it specified length. So length check should be connected to this. Whereas check digit, they ensure that the data input has the correct digit. So I'm going to move this to here. Oops, should be a straight line. Range check whether a number and entered is within a range. Let's say from 1 to 100. So I'm going to pick this because it will check whether the data input is between 2 different values. Whereas type check the type. So check that the data input is an integer because integer is the type. So that's how we solve it. All right, let's move on to the last 2 questions. All right. Take 1 or more boxes in each row to match the type. So let's see. Test data that is always on the limit of acceptability. So this, we know that it is an extreme data, the biggest or smallest value that a program can accept. Third one, test data that is either on limit or test data that is just outside of the limit of acceptability. So we know that this is a boundary data. Test data that will be rejected will be an erroneous data. Test data that is within the limits of acceptability. We know that this is a normal data. All right, if you only write normal data, then it might not be correct because extreme data here are also data that is within the limits of acceptability. So remember to also tick the extreme data here. So last question, describe what is meant by the term variable and constant and give an example in each of your answers. It's not related to testing, but I think that this is a good question to ask. So a variable, remember, is a value that will change as the program is executing, as the program is running. So for instance, when you write a program, you create a variable called total to store the total number, the sum of the numbers entered. So it could be a variable that involve, an example would be a variable that involve counting, because you need to update the variable over and over again. So that's um, a variable, right? The value will change throughout the time. Whereas a constant is like a variable in which its value will not change. Or you can state a stored value that is constant throughout the execution of the program. That is constant throughout the execution of a program. And one example of us using a constant is when, let's say you want to create a variable for pi, and we know that the value of pi will not change because it's a constant. So you can write an example of it is pi value. So that's pretty much it for this video. We talk about the different types of validation methods and also how you can answer questions on testing and also validation and verification. So that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next.